Rights Act was designed to combat tactics denying minorities the right to an effective vote, including redistricting techniques that set out to harm voters based on their race or ethnicity. These are a couple of the tactics there. You see packing is when, so you'll have more, there's an equal number of red and blue squares on there, all right? But they've packed all the red into one district, all right? So even though there's an equal number of blue and red squares, we have 3 districts that are majority blue, and then 1 district that is red. The other technique over there is called cracking. That's the opposite. That's when they take, you'll see that large chunk of blue there in the middle, where you could get some more blue districts, but they'll crack that blue base up into smaller pieces, and so you'll end up with more red districts than blue, even though, again, they're equal numbers. We don't have to spend a lot of time on the Federal Voting Rights Act, considering the size, population, demographics of Nelsonville, distribution, we're pretty good on that. But we do, however, need to spend some time on the Equal Protection Clause. This is also often known as one person, one vote, right? And there's a bit of confusion. Like when we say one person, one vote, that means not that everyone gets a vote, but that every voter in the state is equally represented. All right, that each and every individual vote has equal weight. All right. Now, for larger districts, example for congressional districts, here in Ohio, this is our congressional districts, they're pretty much basically straight even. Every single district has 786,000 people, 630. 786, 630. There's 2 districts that have 786,631. All right, but the 13 other districts all have 786, 630. Now, it's easier for those larger districts to get it down to single people. But state and local legislative districts have a little bit more flexibility on the numbers. They have to be substantially equal. Now, historically, there was a case in 1964, Reynolds v. Sims. The court found that one person, one vote doctrine applied to state apportionment schemes as well as congressional, meaning that state legislative districts required equal population. The Reynolds court wrote that by holding that as a federal constitutional requisite, both houses of state legislature must be apportioned on a population basis. We mean that the Equal Protection Clause requires that a state make an honest and good faith effort to construct districts in both houses as nearly as equal population as practical. All right? That was statewide. That was for your House and Senate districts. In 1968, there was a case brought up out in Texas where they brought this down to the local level. And they found that in Avery v. Midland County, the court applied the one person, one vote principle to local election districts, finding that voters in local jurisdictions were constitutionally entitled to having their votes carrying a substantially similar weight to that of any other voter. In Avery Midland, it was stated that when the state apportions its legislature, it must have a due regard for the Equal Protection Clause. Similarly, when a state delegates lawmaking power to a local government and provides for the election of local officials from districts specified by statute, ordinance, or local charter, it must ensure that those qualified to vote have the same right to an equally effective voice in the election process. So, over the years, there's been some consensus built around what substantially equal means. All right, in 1983, there was a case, Brown v. Thompson. All right, Our decisions have established, as a general matter, an apportionment plan with a maximum population deviation of under 10% falls within the category of minor deviations. All right, if you're over 10%, there's a possibility of creating a case for discrimination, and the state must justify that plan. And the most recent case, we have in 2016, this was in Florida, in the context of state and local legislative districting, states may deviate somewhat from perfect population equality to accommodate traditional districting objectives, but where the maximum population deviation between the largest and smallest district is less than 10%, a state or local legislative map presumptively complies with the one person, one vote rule. All right, so we're looking at a consensus of 10% deviation or under. Now, if you recall, a couple months ago, there was a plan to establish Nelsonville's current precincts as wards, and the League of Women Voters testified advising against that because the deviation within those precincts is at 45%.
Trevor, could you repeat the numbers you found? 700, 1,700?
Oh, I think I have them. Yeah, I don't have them on me, but I can find them for you quickly. I've got a printout here. Despite having larger permissible deviations, any deviation from absolute equality, no matter how small, still should be justified by legitimate considerations. Among them, preserving political subdivisions, maintaining communities of interest, creating geographic compactness, contiguity. Ohio is one of a handful of states that actually have this 10% deviation from equal population written into our Constitution concerning state legislative districts. It's under Article 11, Section 3. However, regarding our local jurisdictions, Ohio law simply requires substantial equal population. However, there are some cities here in Ohio that have gone so far as to include a specific deviation maximum into their city charter. For example, here you have Berea, who specifies 10%. Westlake doesn't allow any more than a 5% variation between districts. And then up in Columbus, because we have a larger population up there in Columbus, there's in our charter, districts cannot exceed more than 1% deviation. All right, so going back to this Ohio Revised Code, that's what deals with the local districting. All right, and in that code, under 731.06, division of city into wards, you'll find subsection C. In order to provide a substantially equal population in each of the wards, the legislative authority, meaning the city council, may redivide the city into wards at any time. Action, though, of this legislative authority must be taken by ordinance and shall be effective for the first municipal primary election occurring at least 150 days after the passage of the ordinance. And then in subsection D, you'll find that all wards shall be bounded, as far as practicable, by county lines, streets, alleys, lot lines, avenues, public grounds, canals, watercourses, municipal corporation lines, center of private streets, railroads, and shall be composed of adjacent and compact territory and substantially equal in population. Now, basically that last line there basically gives you the three things that Ohio requires of your wards. Well, four things: equal population, and then you must stay within those political boundaries, stay aligned with the political boundaries. There's actually 42 states that similarly has these requirements to follow political boundaries. There's also contiguity in there, composed of adjacent and compact. That's contiguity. 49 states have that for their districting. And then finally, compactness. 37 states have compactness as a requirement in their districting. So these right here are your Ohio districting requirements. These are hard requirements. You must follow these: political boundaries, equal population, contiguity, compactness, and of course, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Now, there are some best practices to consider. This is where the league really shines, where we like to focus on. So some of these best practices are observing existing precincts and polling locations. Now, this is more for convenience of the voter. So like if you go in there and start slashing and hacking at precincts and changing folks' voter polling locations, you're going to confuse a lot of folks. And that's not what we want to do. We want more participation. We want folks to be confident in where they're going to the polls. We don't want to cause a lot of confusion. So it's good to kind of, observe those existing precinct lines as much as possible and really take into account of those polling locations. Now, here in Nelsonville, again, we have one polling location for all four of those precincts. So I don't think it's really going to matter what those precinct lines look like now. Once we redraw these wards, those will be redrawn by the Athens County Board of Elections to reflect our new ward lines. Yes?
I would just have a real quick question. I think the last election was the first time, somebody can correct me on that, the first time we had it in one spot. It usually was in 3, I think, locations around the city.
All right.
Is that right?
Yes,
It wasn't
Yes.
multiple.
it was one at the church.
Yes, and it's all at the Job and Family Services building now, and I believe the plan from the Board of Elections is to continue with that in the future.
But before that, we did have it divided up into, I think, 2 or 3.
There were 2. There was 1 and 2 was at the library, and 3 and 4 were at the church.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. But we always want to observe those polling locations and make sure we don't confuse and disrupt the folks' normal plans for voting. Also, future population growth and loss. Some cities are developing a lot faster than others. There's parts of cities, sides of town that are developing faster. Up in Cleveland, when we did the redistricting in December and January, they've lost a lot of population, so they had to cut their council members from 18 to 15. And so, when drawing those new ward boundaries, district boundaries, they kind of kept in mind where that population is falling and a potential for future growth. That way, we can get them to last longer, so we don't have to change them as often. So it's kind of like a just something to keep in mind to help sustainability, I guess. And then you have representational proportionality. Now, a lot of time was spent on this for the state and congressional redistricting in the last few years. And representational proportionality really is just that the districts, the partisan makeup of the districts should reflect the partisan makeup of the community. All right? And again, we don't really have a lot to worry about as far as partisan, gerrymandering in Nelsonville. You all are pretty even Stevens here, and so I don't think there's any way to kind of gerrymander a Democrat or a Republican out of a district here. We're all pretty good, and your long history of nonpartisanship and kind of work. I don't think you have a lot to worry about representational proportionality, but it is a best practice to consider, especially when you're getting into those larger populations and you have more representatives. Their makeup should really reflect the people that they're representing. And then finally, you have communities of interest, and that's I put a little star. That's my big thing, and that's really what we're going to be doing here in Nelsonville while we're drawing these wards, is really talking about community and common goals and common interests and working together to do the best for the city of Nelsonville. And so we're really going to identify these communities and make sure that they are kept together and able to thrive. Communities of interest. They're groups of people who share common economic, environmental, social, and policy needs, and it's good to keep these together. And our community mapping program helps helps us and other map makers understand how everyday Ohioans identify and define their communities, and therefore how they believe district lines should be drawn. And so there isn't any requirements or guidelines for communities of interest as far as districting in Ohio law. However, up in Cuyahoga County, their county commission does require observing communities of interest when drawing their county commissions. So let's see. I'm sorry. I got lost here. All right, what to avoid? All right, incumbency protection. That's something, again, we don't have to worry about because there will be no incumbents in November. So we don't have to worry about protecting incumbents. But we have, there's a good rule of thumb is that you respect incumbency, but you don't protect incumbency. You don't purposely draw somebody out of their district. You want to respect them and the service that they've been doing for their district. So you don't want to go out of your way to draw someone out of their district. You kind of want to respect that, but you also do not want to go out of your way to protect that incumbent. To go out, go out of your way to draw them into a district to make them safe. And then another thing to avoid is partisan gerrymandering. And again, I've already gone over that. It's kind of like the cracking and the packing, except for with minority representation, it's partisan. So you don't want to, crack if you have large pockets of Democratic voters, you don't want to crack them and split them into a bunch of different districts. You don't want to pack them all into one district so you diminish their voting power. But again, like I said, Nelsonville should be pretty good on that. All right, so back to the communities of interest, because I said this is where we'll spend a lot of our time. And so, it's especially helpful for folks who've been traditionally left out of the political process. And like I said, it's a way for the community to tell stories and show what makes them unique when compared to other communities. And best thing, they're defined by you. And 24 states actually have requirements to observe communities of interest directly, asking the redistricting bodies to consider various types of these communities of interest when drawing district lines. As I said, Ohio is not one of them, but we do have that Cuyahoga County Commission. And so just real quick recap, what we want to do and our vision for the city of Nelsonville. Right? We want to make sure we prohibit any kind of drawing lines to favor or disfavor candidates or parties. We're strictly nonpartisan. Drawing lines should be a nonpartisan activity. They should be putting people first, not parties. We want to ensure that each ward is as nearly equal in population as possible, so that every Nelsonville voter can be heard equally and fairly. At least get that well under 10%, that's the goal. Work to keep communities of interest together as much as possible. And then we'll also be, I'm working with the city, where we will be opening a kind of a public portal on the city website, where folks can submit testimony. You can submit, kind of ideas for neighborhood solidarity, proposed maps. Even I'll give you a link here up there at the table. There's a handout with links to Dave's redistricting. If you have any mapping folk here or would like to, I've also got a link there to the map of Nelsonville that I created that you could go into and look and play around. We want to set up meetings, more meetings. This is just the first of a series for the next couple months. We want to set up these meetings that are accessible, times and locations. So if we have any suggestions on better days and times, we get folks in here to participate. I'm all open. And we will be live. We'll be projecting these maps up on the screen while they're being created. And then we're going to provide folks with necessary population and geographic statistics so that you can effectively analyze and evaluate these maps and find your home on there. And so we'll use that open source mapping tool, Dave's redistricting app, so residents can access and view the neighborhoods on these proposed maps. All right, here's our timeline. We've got the primary coming up. And we'll have a lot clearer view of how to proceed from here, like how much time we have. But as it stands right now, we're gonna shoot for a couple of meetings in May. The first of these is gonna be, we'll invite some citizens and stakeholders from the community, kind of like a panel thing, to talk about community and important concerns of Nelsonville citizens. We'll discuss the meaning and identification of those communities, and then examine the possibilities and limitations, because there, some of those census blocks, like I said, some of them just have a couple people in there, but then there's some of them that may have a few hundred, and so you can't always get as neat, compact, equal districts as you'd like. There's going to be some, I don't want to say sacrifices, but there's going to be some, give and take. Not everyone's going to be happy. You're going to have to, you're going to have to draw the line somewhere. And then so in May, end of May, and then June, we'll be doing that open, transparent, public map drawing, where it will be projected on the screen, and we'll play with those census blocks, and we'll try and get get these districts down to as equal population as possible that reflect and keep communities together. And during that whole time, we'll always have discussion and feedback with the community. And then we're planning to present to the council in July. We'll have hopefully one single proposal that we can present to the council.
Just a quick note, normally July and August, the city council only meets for one council meeting for July and one council meeting in August.
All right.
Normally.
Right. We'll shoot for the July. If we miss July, maybe August. But and that also will depend on that May primary as well, because I believe if determining how that turns out, we either have a nice long summer to go over maps, or we'll have an expedited process and try to get this done by the end of July. But here's what you can do. As citizens of Nelsonville, before we meet again, and I'll give you my contact information. Just think about the issues that you and your neighbors care about. What brings you together? What would you like to see reflected in a city council ward map? And invite your neighbors and friends, community members to participate. Bring them along next time when we get this meeting up. And then I've got that handout over there in the back. If you, I know some people don't like tech at all, but if you like playing with maps, there is a link on there, and you can familiarize yourself with the census block map of Nelsonville. I've got it on there at that bit.ly link. And then finally, we'll be opening up that submission portal for citizens. And I want you to, present community profiles. Tell me which streets should be together, which blocks should be together in the district, which neighborhoods should stay together in the district. Tell me some stories. If you have maps of neighborhoods, or you've been fiddling around with your own district map, share that with us. Share that with other folks. This really, as Debbie said, this really is a people-driven process. We're here as your guide, but we really want you, the people of Nelsonville, to take the driver's seat and create the city council districts that you would like to see. And with that, I will just open it to questions and comments. And there's my contact information along with Debbie up there. There's also at the League of Women Voters of Ohio there, the /CPP-redistricting. Got a lot of districting resources and information there if you're interested in that. And with that, I'll open it up. Any questions for folks? Yes, Jenny.
I guess what confuses me, and that can be done pretty easily, is the precincts versus the wards. And my understanding is the precincts are by the Board of Elections, but they're not drawn up as a ward because of the population differences in the precincts. Is that correct?
Right. Well, wards and precincts are completely different things. But the funny thing about Ohio, so once we hit that 5,000 mark as a village, to a city, all right? And once you make that transition, Ohio Revised Code says you'll have 4 wards for representatives to be elected from, and then 3 at large. So they give you, it states that you must start with that 4. Now, because of the similarity in population, a lot of the times when those cities transfer over to us, or when those villages become a city, they have 4 precincts, because each precinct is about 1,400 people, and so they generally will have 4 precincts. Now you could go ahead and use those precincts as wards if the population was substantially equal, but because Nelsonville's wards are so off, like Window was saying, there's a ward that has about 783 people, I think, and then another ward that has like 1,200, 1,300, something like that. And so there are small cities in Ohio. For example, I think Delphos is one up there in Allen County. They're like 5,000, a couple hundred people. They have 4 precincts. Their precincts are substantially equal in population, so they use their precincts as wards.
And you can do that.
So you can do that. And the Board of Elections, generally the only time they'll change up those precinct lines is when population. So if you have one that's over 1,400 electors, they'll generally get in there and even it out. Or if you have, up in Lucas County, they just did a bunch of re-precincting because they had to change the wards, and so they consolidated some things and was able to put some precincts together into the school district. So the Board of Elections will take care of that, but the Board of Elections will follow the lead of the municipality. So if the municipality does a redraw of their wards and then hands that to the Board of Elections, they'll adjust their precincts to fall in line with those city boards. But
Are the Board of Elections, do they look at Democrat, Republican, and Independent when they put the precincts together?
no.
And that's what the wards have to do, is to equally divide that, or just population?
We just do population.
Okay.
It's, you don't really go into a mapping proposal looking to equal like partisanship. Kind of want to go in there with blinders on as far as partisanship. You want to be nonpartisan. But the reason why we were so heavily advocating for proportional representation these last few years at the State House and congressional districts was because they're already so far out of proportion where they needed to be adjusted and rectified. It was already gerrymandered for a particular party, and so we wanted to make sure that the partisan proportionality was represented. But as far as like when you're starting out going into a redistricting, you're not going in there trying to divide everyone equally. You really just want to equal population, keep things compact, contiguous, and keep those communities together.
I would imagine that in a bigger, I'm sorry, you asked that.
Oh, no,
I was just gonna say, I would imagine in a bigger, Cleveland or Columbus, the representation would have to be balanced because of the Republican, Democrat, and Independent. If it was basically all Republicans or a bigger part of the county or the ward was Republicans, then the Republican candidate would be more likely to be elected. Is that correct?
Well, you know, you're going to be very hard pressed to draw a Republican district in Cleveland.
Let's just say Democrat.
Yeah. You know, there's no requirement that any council needs to be any kind of reflection of the people. You could, you know, Nelsonville could have an all Republican city council or all Democratic city council. You know, it wouldn't be an issue either way. But the issue is drawing districts to ensure that and to protect that ratio. And I'm sorry,
This is kind of to jump off what Mr. Flowers is saying, just to make sure I understand. When it comes down to our current precinct versus our ward maps that we're looking at being disproportional at that something percent difference, when we reset things and we have to get under 10 or whatever, 10%, 1%, does that come down to kind of trying to shore up those boundary lines where they won't be perfect, where Columbus has more ability to get closer to that 1%, where something like here, it's much harder to hit the 1%, so as we plan, that's the leeway.
So because the population is so small, we have about just over 5,000 people. You know, 1% is 50 people. You'll have a census block that may have 200 or 170 people. And so, you know, you cannot split that census block. That's the only thing. You can split precincts, but you cannot divide these census blocks. These census blocks are, they're permanent for us. You know, the only folks who can change a census block is the U.S. Census Bureau. So, you know, those census blocks can be changed. And so, once, you know, it's hard to, like, when we're working with that 1%, 50 people, you know, when we got these census blocks that are 70, 80 people, it's not possible. But yeah, like you said, in those larger cities like Cleveland and Columbus, you know, we'll have so many census blocks where, you know, we literally have dozens of census blocks that may have, you know, one or a dozen people in them, where we can more easily get them to, you know, even out. But yeah, Nelsonville is going to be a lot harder. You know, I've actually, you know, to tell you the truth, I've been playing around with Nelsonville's map a lot, and you know, I haven't been able to get it down to 1%, but I've got it under 2.
So is that the figure we would need to be, 1%?
Oh no, it's you know, it's you know, as far, you know, and this still is, like, there's still some debate about what substantially equal means and where it applies. You know, so for example, you know, there is a town, or there's a city in Franklin County that has within their charter that they're allowed to go up to 15%. Now, I don't know where they came up with that number, and I don't, like, not sure, you know, if anybody wanted to sue over it, I don't know. But like they would probably, if someone was, they would probably have to go in there and you know, give a, you know, justify why they're up to 15% deviation. And that may just because, you know, they're a small city and, you know, it's impossible to divide those census blocks. They may have, you know, a downtown that's very populated heavily, and, you know, you have other districts that are more rural and spread out, and so they just, you know, aren't able to get that close. But I would say as long as we're under 10%, that's seems to be the general consensus as far as Supreme Court rulings over the last 50 years. 10% for local jurisdictions, as long as you're within that 10%, you're in compliance. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how the students in Hacking figuring out this consideration?
Yeah, I gave a call to, I think it's Danny Kelly, who runs the GIS department on Hacking College. He hasn't got back to me. I did send an email to another professor who works with their certification, but I haven't heard back yet. But I would like to get the students of Hocking College involved. You know, and this is another thing. I have put in a records request with the Secretary of State, asking for that census, that enumeration that Nelsonville did to keep their status as a city, that Mr. Sappington turned into the Secretary of State back in October, I believe. I've been asking for that information, and hopefully once we get it, we'll be able to have the students at Hocking College put that data into the mapping program so we can more evenly distribute the population of Nelsonville. Because what we have right now on days redistricting is what the census reported, which left Nelsonville, I think, with 4,700 and some folks. So that's their numbers for Nelsonville when you're using the public software, because that's what the census has. But if we could get those numbers, when we get those numbers from the state, I think the students at the college would very easily be able to use the GIS to upload that data and put that into the mapping program so we can have actual more accurate population numbers.
Would they be involved in, that's what you were going to ask, right? Would they be involved in the census,
Yeah, I was just thinking.
in the mapping?
Oh, maybe.
Would they be involved in keeping us under 10% involving the 1,800 or 2,000 students that go to Hopkins College?
How's the student population?
Population.
To the violence?
Yeah, so the student population is it just counts those folks who are reported as living on campus, or they're Nelsonville residents. And so it is, and then, you know, they're pretty distributed evenly as well. You know, they're not all counted right there at the college. You know, they've got, you know, residences all over the city. There is a little pocket, you know, of density, population density back there. But I mean, it's no more than areas in downtown. I could actually, you know, you've got some time, I could bring it up for you.
My question is, if they're not registered to vote in Athens County, are they considered to be part of the ward or the precincts?
No, only registered, or I'm sorry, only citizens, residents of Nelsonville are counted in population.
And that would be their mailing
Yes. Well, the residential address, we might have a different mailing address, but they.
Residential
Yes.
address.
So if they, if they're going to Hocking College and, they're still voting back home, then they won't be counted.
That was my question.
So it goes based off of like where they're registered to vote.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because like the student may be registered to vote here, but the address on their driver's license might be like a home address if they're living in temporary housing.
Yes.
So it doesn't go by permanent address, it goes by the address where the person is
It
registered.
goes by the census count back in 2020,
2020.
yeah. So when they did that census count up there at the college in 2020, whoever was a resident, Nelsonville resident at the time, was counted.
Okay.
let's see.
Another question.
Yes.
I have another question about the wards. Will the mapping be done before election? Because they will need to have more candidates than on the ballot in November, am I not? Is that correct or not?
Well, so the going theory, the running theory is that if the ordinance passes in May, then we will need district maps by August so that they'll be in place by November. That's the theory. There may be some complications to that. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure how that will go, but that's the theory. But if the ordinance does not pass and issue 23 stays in place, then the wards, the current city council doesn't have authority to establish wards. So we will, we'll present them to them, and then they'll kind of put them on the shelf for that new city council that comes in January. And then once that new city council is seated in January, they have 90 days to create ward maps. So they could, hopefully they'll see these ward maps that the city put together, the citizens themselves put together, and it's a no-brainer. Hey, these are our maps, good to go. Or they could just say, you know what, we don't want to do those, we're just going to make our own. They have 90 days to do that.
So, how there would be, who would be on the city council then? Just be a large candidate then?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Who would, if there are no wards being elected, no ward council people being elected in November, there would be a large candidate selected in November, and they would be the people that would map it,
Yes.
so to speak. Okay. So it would probably be the next election or special election to have ward council people then, after the 90 days. We would have 90 days. The city would have 90 days to get the wards together and find council people.
Right, and then they would have to be passed by ordinance 150 days before the next primary election for the city council.
That's a 27.
27, right. So they actually wouldn't take, they would be voted on and passed hopefully in January, but they won't actually be used until the primary election of 27. And then,
Trevor, if anyone or anybody here, we have a lot of extra. If you volunteer to pass them out to your neighbors and maybe invite them to the next meeting, that would be great. Give you extras. Here you go. Pass out those things. You too?
all right, see, so you've got this,
What? Oh, sorry.
so you got this, here's your Hocking College census block right here. This is where all the residencies are. If you hop on to the other side there, so you hop on to the other side here, and we've got zero population. So all the residences are on this side here, and you've got 382 people in this census block. And they're all voting age, they're all college students. So you can't split that 382 up. So that 382, that's stuck there. So you can add, so when we divide the 4 wards up, I think we're looking for an average of, I think it was,
1,200.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's like 1,200 something. So you'll have that 382, and you can add whatever you want to that to get up to the 1,200 average. But you know, being right there in the corner as well, you can only go north, and you know, so like I said, we won't be getting into these limitations and possibilities in these next meetings, like where we can go with certain districts. But yeah, that's one of the limitations that we have here in Nelsonville is that you got that big hunk of population down there at the college in that one census block.
Doesn't that Hocking College, mainly students, you said, the students leave every 2 years.
Yeah, well, you know, and it's you know, that's one of the things, you know, one of the things that makes it so difficult with these census numbers is schools, colleges and universities, and also prisons. And I'm sure that's why, you know, when they did that census count, you know, it only came up with 4,783 people or whatever, and then you folks here in Nelsonville got together and was like, well, no, we've got more folks than that, and went out and did another count. You know, it could have been that maybe those census folk came here and, you know, had that kind of student egress, you know, they weren't around maybe. You know, there's all kinds of, you know, and we had a bit, you know, other difficulties with this last census, you know, with the COVID and everything. So there was a lot of problems with the census count this last time around. So, you know, hopefully those students will be able to get that data, and we can kind of see where our folks are more evenly distributed here throughout the city. We'll get into this in future meetings. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Good.
Oh yes, we had some folks. I've got some goodies here for folks. I'm going to raffle off these 2 coffee mugs that I have, and then anybody who wants a T-shirt, just come up and get one. All right? I've got 3 small, 3 medium, 3 large, 3 extra large.
Well, I'll add that to my T-shirt I got.
And we got some tote bags too if you want a tote bag.